Only 4 weeks remain until most of your fantasy playoffs begin, and that means it's time to get serious as you make your run after this week without any more bye weeks and keep player emissions to get in the way of your starting lineups. We have top player matchups to debate, including from the premier game of the week in Minnesota, as we offer our expert analysis on key questions and more, including the latest injury news as OFN Fantasy on the Ouralds Football Radio Network starts now. All right, welcome to another Sunday morning game day edition of OFN Fantasy prior to kickoff today in the NFL for November 19th, 2017. I'm Greg DePalma. Let's get right to it. As I introduce my co-hosts and fantasy experts to the show, first, he's the chief fantasy analyst at Ouralds.com and the co-host of the Bill Roden on Sports podcast on iTunes, Jamal Murphy. So, Jamal, no Jets game, the latest bye week possible, so you don't have to worry about that interfering in your day.
That's true, and then skipping the Giants game because they're terrible. I'll be home, hopefully, watching the game.
All right, welcome also another Jet fan to the program, fantasy expert and TV sports producer Dan Weiners to the show. Dan, what did you think about the game on Thursday night, the Pittsburgh-Tennessee game? Not the score, of course, but what did you take it all from a fantasy perspective outside of the obvious players like Antonio Brown and even Le'Veon Bell?
Well, two Tennessee players that stood out to me. One was Derrick Henry for, having a pretty disappointing output once again. I mean, he's got to be the most owned. If there was a function of percentage owned versus smallest output, that would be, he'd be leading in that category because nobody wants to give up on him because they know about his incredible talent. But doesn't seem like he's ever going to get the looks to be a productive starter, or at least not this season. Of course, as soon as I say that, I'm sure, things will change. And then on the positive side, Rashard Matthews, he's got to be one of the more underrated, wide receivers in the NFL. He's just very consistent, and he had a huge game in spite of, probably somewhat due to garbage time, but, I think he's definitely a starter for the rest of the season.
Jamal, what do you think about JuJu Smith? And they are trying to it looks like they're trying to get back to Martavis Bryant a little bit. And maybe wouldn't be the worst idea in the world if you need some wide receiver depth to pick up Martavis Bryant just in case things start to click. I think you'd still have to be a little bit, injury prone and maybe a big matchup reason why you would want to go that route. But JuJu Smith has definitely helped that offense big time because without JuJu Smith, I think they're more like the offense we've seen over the last couple of years. He really opens things up for players like Brown.
Yeah, no, he's a serious player right now. Over the past couple of weeks, a lot of it is due to Martavis Bryant's problems, and I wouldn't, I think Bryant is probably only available in like a 10-team league or something like that. Most people held on to him, hoping that he'll resurface, and I think he will resurface. Tomlin is going to give him another chance. He's giving him a little tough love, making him work his way back. But he's too talented not to get back involved in the offense. So, in the next couple of weeks, I expect Bryant to be a factor too. But JuJu Smith, I don't think is going anywhere. I think he's going to be a solid contributor. You got Brown who put up like 50 points fantasy-wise on Thursday night. So if you're playing against him, like I am in our league, it's pretty much over. But no, so you got JuJu Smith, you're going to have Bryant, and you're going to have Brown, getting most of the touches there. But all three will be a factor down the stretch.
Are we at a point now, and I don't know if this might have happened anyway this past season, I wouldn't have been surprised, but are we at a point now, Dan, where Antonio Brown could be the top pick in the draft next year?
I think Antonio Brown could be the top pick in the draft any year.
Yeah.
Obviously there were a handful, I think 3 running backs that were in front of him this year. But he was the number one wide receiver.
And I mean, I guess what I should say is consensus. Do you think it's possible that he could end up as a consensus number one, statistically, nationally, in a draft next year?
I don't think he will, because I think, you still have guys like Zeke, who will probably be number one overall, David Johnson, assuming there are no setbacks in his recovery. I don't see that changing. But certainly Antonio Brown will be the number one wide receiver, and he'll be in the top 5, top 3 or 4 probably overall. And, I said loudly all this preseason I wouldn't blame anybody who took Antonio Brown with their first overall pick. And those people would probably be doing pretty well right now.
All right, let's start off with the big game of the week. Who would have thought this when the season began? But it's the Rams and the Vikings, 2 teams coming in with winning streaks, and it's in Minnesota. So the Rams will put their high-powered offense on the line against a really good defense. And that's the reason why I thought that this might be a good debate here. Maybe not, but Jamal, what about if let's say you just picked up Case Keenum, and after the big performance last week, and now you're sitting there, and all of a sudden you're kind of going, do I actually think of starting Case Keenum over Goff today because of the fact that you have a better defense, in Minnesota, or are you like, absolutely no way, Goff is clearly the best player, I wouldn't even think of that?
Yeah, I'll go with the latter. There's no way I start Keenum over Goff. Goff, former number one overall pick, actually playing like it this year, on absolute fire. He has a lot of weapons, great offensive coach. Keenum, on the other hand, is just a surprise, as far as production goes. He is giving you more than you'd expect. He is a solid pickup if you're in a bind, but no way. I don't care who he's playing against. There's no way I'm starting him over Goff right now.
I mean, I think the good thing is, Dan, is that Case Keenum, it's very rare that this late in the season that you could pick up a guy like Keenum and feel pretty good about possibilities in case you need to start a quarterback, either through an injury or let's just say you have a quarterback that might be a top quarterback that might be struggling every once in a while, like I say a Stafford or a Matt Ryan or something. It's good to know that you can pick up a guy like Keenum.
Yeah, there are a few other guys that are probably in the same range ownership-wise that I would recommend over Keenum, like probably Jay Cutler, Ryan Fitzpatrick, and the main reason being that Case Keenum has probably the shortest leash of any starter in the NFL this week. A couple of bad series, and it just seems like all of the state of Minnesota is dying to see what Teddy Bridgewater can do back in action. Let's not forget he was their franchise quarterback, and he's still very young. I think he's 25. So it's only a matter of time.
Would you pick him up as a bench player, Bridgewater?
If you're in a serious quarterback quandary, if you're streaming, he's certainly worth it. The problem is you have to wait for that change. But the change is imminent, and that's why I wouldn't feel great about Casey.
There are a lot of teams out there right now that in the NFL that have struggling quarterback situations that are just probably shaking their head at Minnesota, that they're going, you got to be kidding me. It's not just and look, fantasy is one thing, and there's no question. This is, I think, Keenum's second week of the year where he's had over 30 points. So it's not like he's done this all the time, but still, you're first place, you're on a winning streak, you're coming off maybe the game of your career, and you got to worry about being pulled if you have like a bad half or a bad game for a guy who hasn't played in 2 years. So there's so many other teams out there struggling for quarterbacks, Jamal, including the New York Jets, that I think there'd be a lot of Jet fans who'd be going, oh, go ahead, screw Case Keenum, so then he can leave. We'll take Case Keenum.
Well, McCown and Keenum are pretty close as far as I'm concerned. It's not like I would feel that much better with Keenum and McCown, but I get your point. I don't think Keenum is in danger to that extent. I don't think if he has a bad half or something like that, they're going to put Bridgewater in. I really don't understand why they're even making it a question at this point. Yeah. Obviously, in terms, if you look toward the future, I would say Bridgewater is more of the future than Keenum is, but we're not even sure about either one of them. So, but fantasy wise, Keenum, you use him with, if you need to. I think he's still, no matter, despite the fact he's had a couple of good games, he's still one of the guys that you use if you have to.
Now, for Goff, he has a couple of big weapons, Dan. Now we're starting to get Watkins a little bit more comfortable with the offense, making big plays. But Woods has been the top receiver for them all season, or at least most of the season. So if you had to make the call today, and let's say you had both of them on your team, and you would only need to start one, which would you go with?
I mean, I think you definitely at this point got to go with Robert Woods, top guy. And then it's sort of a toss-up between Cooper Kupp and Sammy Watkins, both of whom have been big in games and have been non-existent in games. But Robert Woods has been the one consistent factor in the last 2 weeks. He's been playing like a number one wide receiver. I think he's in like 60 points in 2 games. So for now, you got to go with him. But I do, cautious. I always want cautious optimism. I mean, we've seen this already this season with guys who are typically considered, the second or third options, having a few really big weeks in a row, whether it's Nelson Agholor, Paul Richardson. In general, these guys who aren't projected to be this good will come back to earth. But for now, he's definitely the top wide receiver to go with for the Rams.
And what would you do, Jamal, as far as what do you need to see from Watkins regarding a little bit more consistency before you decide? Yeah, I mean, I'm all set. I think that he can wind up being the top guy between the two.
I mean, I got to see a lot. I got to see something I've never seen from him. Especially this year. He just hasn't done much. I mean, he's had good week, supposedly good weeks the last couple weeks, but it was, two receptions, one reception,
yeah.
Happened to get a touchdown in both.
Yeah.
I mean, when you compare him to Woods, there's no comparison. Even Kupp, I think, has produced much more. He's much more consistent than Watkins. So Watkins, I think he's in a situation where, fantasy wise, you use him if you're in a bind at wide receiver, and you just pray for a breakout game or another freak touchdown. But if not, if you have any kind of similar options, you probably go the other way.
All right, now let's stick with this wide receiver question and talk about another big game, Dallas and Philadelphia. And we've talked a lot about Des Bryant this year, Dan. And we've also talked a lot about Nelson Agholor with the start that he was able to get off to. And then just recently, referencing Alshon Jeffrey, I think made this point a couple of weeks ago that maybe he needed a little bit more time. Agholor was there with Wentz last year. Jeffrey is a clear number one receiver, and he's starting to play like it now, Dan. It's been back-to-back weeks. Now he's got the bye week coming into this game. So first question would be, who would you start in this game, Jeffrey or Agholor? And then after you make that decision, whoever's that number one, who would you start, that Eagle number one receiver or Des Bryant? Dan.
Well, I'm definitely starting Jeffrey over Agholor. That no hesitation on that choice. Because, like you said, not only has Jeffrey had 2 good games in a row, Nelson Agholor has had 2 very disappointing games in a row where he scored single-digit fantasy points. So I don't think there's any. Could he have a 2-touchdown game? Sure, it's possible. He's demonstrated the ability to do that this year. Referring to Nelson Agholor, but I definitely think you got to go with Jeffrey. Now, comparing Jeffrey and Des Bryant, those are 2 guys who are like really, really evenly matched. Bit of a coin toss, I guess. I'd probably go with Bryant if I had to choose, because I have a feeling that Dallas will be forced to throw, because I think the Eagles are going to get out to a big lead early. Of course, it's pretty likely that Jeffrey will have a part of that. So definitely a toss-up. You're in a good position if you only have room to start one of those 2 guys.
Jamal, same question.
Yeah, I mean, I pretty much agree. We talked about both of these guys. I have both of these guys on different teams. I kind of look at them as fake number one receivers, but solid high end twos. It all depends on the matchup. They're actually playing against each other, like you said. Both guys have been nicked up with injuries. Alshon Jeffrey is seriously questionable for this game. They're saying he's expected to play, but it was in doubt. Dez Bryant played hurt last week. So to me, in this situation, I go with the worst, the lesser of the two pass defenses, which I believe is the Eagles. So I'm going to go Dez Bryant.
All right. And by the way, latest news, what do we got? We got Tyron Smith not starting this week, right? Correct? That's what we got. So back-to-back weeks where he's not going to play. And, of course, with Elliott out. So offensively, we saw what happened last week with Atlanta, and the Eagles have had a whole extra week to prepare. So that's a big edge for the Eagles coming into this matchup with Dallas. We saw exactly what happened when Dak Prescott didn't have you got to think about it. Those are probably his two top players on offense, Smith and Elliott, and big difference when they're not there for him. All right, let's go to another key game for two teams battling it out for a playoff berth, and that's Baltimore at Green Bay. So now all of a sudden, Danny Woodhead, who I do have in my other league, I had picked him up in this league, the league that we're in a few weeks ago, but then I had to move him out for room. And somebody else has him in our league now. And so Danny Woodhead, we have no idea, Dan, how much he's going to be used yet. But we do know, based on his history, based on Joe Flacco's history, based on the first game of the season before Woodhead got hurt, that Flacco is going to throw to this guy all day long. So the question just is how much, will they go with him this early in the process? So would you need at least a week's worth of time to decide whether or not that's even a decision with Alex Collins if you go in that route? Let's say you picked up Woodhead because you had Collins. Are you going, okay, yeah, I'm still going with Collins this week, and then I'll decide what to do after that?
Yeah, that's basically the way I would approach it. I mean, I need to see it. Although, it depends on the situation. If I'm choosing between starting Woodhead and Collins this week, I'd probably go Collins. That's also because I like Baltimore this week. I see them trying to control the game clock. And so, Collins is more the early down workhorse featured back where, certainly Woodhead's not going to get a bunch of carries. The question is he going to get a ton of passes on third down, which I think he will when they're playing from behind. I just don't know if that's the case this week. But, like I said originally, it depends on your options. If you're choosing between, starting Danny Woodhead and someone like, Rod Smith from the Cowboys, I'd go with Woodhead.
Jamal, what do you think?
Yeah, I mean, I'm thinking the same way. Got to wait and see as far as Woodhead goes. I do think he'll be a factor, probably next week and maybe this week. But it's tough to take a guy who's been out I don't know how many weeks on the IR with a hamstring. First game back, not a great offense in general. The only way I put Woodhead in my lineup this week is if I have really nothing else. I have no other option. Yeah,
of course, it is the last bye week, so that's
which is possible, right?
Yeah.
You may have no other option.
Yeah, and look, Collins, even though he's been the guy that's looked like he may be a number one guy for Baltimore right now, I don't know. I get the feeling that Woodhead will take over that role real fast, and really Collins has only had one big week, so it's not like he's been some master running back option
right.
For the Ravens.
I have a league. I'm in a league where I'm getting killed by buys. And my team just happens to suck anyway. But
okay.
My running backs are Rex Burkhead and J.D. McKissick. So if I was in that situation, I'd definitely put Woodhead in my starting lineup.
Why do your team suck this year?
This team sucks. It just sucks, man.
I mean, did you notice anything? I mean, don't we all try to learn something after? Because we don't always end up with great drafts. So do we always try to learn?
I think it's like real NFL, it's a combination of
disappointment
and luck and bye weeks. Like this week, McCaffrey's on a bye week. Bunches is on a bye week. Devontae Freeman with would be playing normally, but he's hurt. He's out with a concussion.
Can you name
So
like a player or two that instantly pops into your head and say, yeah, these guys have been really disappointing for me?
Well, Matt Ryan. This is one of my Matt Ryan teams. Kelvin Benjamin did a little bit with Carolina. Has done nothing with Buffalo so far. And then probably poor drafting of Frank Gore and stuff like that. Had to pick up Marlon Mack. He hasn't really been producing. So across the board.
All right. Now, also in that game, Dan, we've got a wide receiver question here. What would you do between Jordy Nelson for the Packers and Jeremy Maclin for Baltimore? Because Maclin has started to play a little bit better with Flacco. And again, coming off the bye week, Packers have a bad secondary. Nelson's a better player. Packers are coming off the best performance from Hundley. But Ravens are also a better defensive team. So I think that's an interesting matchup or debate.
Yeah, I mean, I think I'd probably start Maclin, to be honest with you. Jordy Nelson is just not producing since Aaron Rodgers went down, which is not shocking. And last week, Devontae Adams looked like he was the wide receiver with the best connection with Hundley, certainly. Whereas on Baltimore's side of the ball, whenever he's played, Maclin has sort of steadily improved his chemistry with Joe Flacco to the point now where I think he's clearly the number one receiving option. Although obviously Danny Woodhead being on the field could potentially play a role with that, but it's pretty much a toss up. I think I'd probably go Maclin this week, though.
Yeah, I think Maclin should be. I think you got to go that way, don't you, Jamal? With Maclin.
I can never say you got to go the way of a Baltimore wide receiver
over Jordy Nelson. Yeah, right.
Yeah, when Flacco's your quarterback, and I get it. Green Bay's in not much better shape with Hundley as a QB, but Jordy Nelson, I'm obviously a better player than Maclin. I think it's pretty much a toss-up. You got to hope that Hundley comes along, that they're getting better each week, and that, eventually those talented, skilled position guys that they have in Green Bay will be put to use. I would actually lean towards the Green Bay matchup right there.
Okay. So Jordy Nelson, you mean you would go with him? Okay. And by the way, I think that if you have if you think that you may go to the playoffs, so let's say you are definitely in the playoffs, or not definitely, but you're a couple of games up and you go, yeah, I'd have to have a disaster here, but you're sure not sure about your quarterback position. I don't think it's a bet if you've got that extra spot in your lineup. I think it may not be a bad idea, Dan, to go ahead and pick up Aaron Rodgers just in case, because if he does come back, especially after the win last week, if the Packers go on and they're there, like have a shot at the playoffs with like 3 weeks to go and Aaron Rodgers can return, then why not pick him up if you have the space, which I did, which is the reason I picked him up. I had the space, so I figured why not? He was my starting quarterback anyway when the season began, and I definitely need a quarterback if I am going to be there. And, of course, Week 15 is the start of the playoffs for a lot of us fantasy leaguers. So that's not a bad idea if you've got the roster spot, right?
I mean, listen, as soon as that news broke last week that he was taking snaps, he got snatched up in every single league I'm in. So, if somebody does have to end up dropping him because they're, trying to grab someone else who's the soup du jour, you should definitely roster Rodgers, David Johnson, and Zeke are three guys that could be huge difference makers in the playoffs, which is, of course, where it counts the most.
All right, now let's get to this matchup, which is not a great matchup at all, of course. It's winless Cleveland and Jacksonville, but I do want to ask a question regarding these running backs, Jamal, and that is, would you go with Fournette or Duke Johnson?
I think you got to go with Fournette. I mean, he's a beast. Duke Johnson is a guy. I think he's like a flex option. I think if you have decent running backs, he's a flex option. He's going to get you some catches, but he's been inconsistent throughout the year in terms of the touches he gets. He usually does something with those touches, but I think if you have Fournette, he stays in your lineup no matter what. As long as he's playing and healthy.
Okay. And no debate there then, Dan, as far as Fournette, who over the last few weeks, ever since he got benched, it's I don't know. I mean, you've had a couple of goose eggs. Even last week wasn't all that productive. This is kind of reminding me of when we all talked about Fournette around draft time. This is why I didn't think that me personally, I would never have drafted Leonard Fournette that high. He's a talented kid, but he's got baggage. And I think now we're starting to see the baggage. But the matchup does favor, of course, Jacksonville, because the Duke would have to go up against that Jag defense too.
Yeah, I mean, it's really the only question is if Fournette's going to play.
That's true too.
He was a late add to the injury report, and
Yep.
he definitely might not play.
Yeah.
Because the Jags might decide they don't need him. Why risk him against this Browns team? Although watch that come back to bite them, because the Browns will beat someone eventually.
Yeah.
But probably not today. And so,
well, what would you do though if he starts, knowing that it is a kind of right now maybe a game time decision? Doesn't that also maybe weigh in with not knowing if he's going to last the whole game?
Well, I'll tell you what. If he doesn't play, for me this is easy. If he plays, I'm starting him.
Okay.
If he doesn't play, I'm trying to pick up Chris Ivory and start him.
All right.
And then my third option would be Duke Johnson.
Okay. Let's go to Buffalo and the Chargers. A few things here. Let's talk about a couple of wide receivers that I actually have on my team, both Kelvin Benjamin and Keenan Allen. So which way would you go, Jamal? Benjamin or Allen? Quarterback change in Buffalo. Boy, I just love, I've got a nice little sound bite that I'll play on the Jet Show next week on NFL Live. They were all talking about the change to the younger quarterback, and it sounded like everything that I've been preaching regarding what the Jets need to do with their situation. And it's like, boy, why can't my team do that? Why can't they do that? I mean, the Bills are 5-4 for crying out loud, and they're making the move. But anyway, how does that going to affect? Maybe I guess it can't be any worse, right? To get the young kid in there, or do you think it will be with Benjamin?
Yeah, it can't get any worse for Benjamin because he hasn't done anything. With the Bills, at least so far, he had a couple garbage time catches. Sorry, last week. Starting the new quarterback, so it can't get any worse for him. For Buffalo, it could get worse. I mean, we don't know what this kid can do. We'll see. And so I stay away from that whole situation. I'll go with Keenan Allen, who's hasn't been great, but has been okay. At least he's still in the mix. He's had 4 receptions the past couple games. He's basically averaging around 4 receptions, maybe 5 any given week. About 50, 60 yards. So that's probably what you're going to get. I know there was some talk of Phillip Rivers, maybe missing this game, but it looks like he's going to play. So I think, to me, that's the solid decision is Keenan Allen.
All right. Dan, what do you think about that?
Yeah, I mean, something must be in the water because Jamal and I are
agreeing too much
on an unusually large amount of topics today.
All right. And how about the tight end situation? Hunter Henry, Charles Clay, Dan. Which way would you go?
I think you have to go Hunter Henry because, Charles Clay is still recovering from a knee injury and it's had him questionable all week. And, obviously the new starter. And it's like a musical chairs in Buffalo with their offense right now as far as, Jordan Matthews coming back from being hurt and Kelvin Benjamin being traded to the team and now Peterman starting. That, Charles Clay's whole appeal in the beginning of the season, like this is not some sort of Hall of Fame tight end.
Sure.
He was just having a nice start to the season because him and Tyrod Taylor had the best chemistry.
Yeah.
Because none of the other wide receivers were even on the team the year before. Now Tyrod Taylor's not starting, so that's out the window. So
yep.
I would go with Hunter Henry, even though he was disappointing last week. He's going to have some big games coming up towards the end of the season.
Yeah, no, I know you have Henry, right, Jamal, in our league?
Yeah, this was actually a decision I had to make, and it's not a good sign for my team. It's not a position you want to be in. I ended up, agreeing with Dan and going with Hunter Henry, even though he had 2 receptions for 11 yards 2 games ago and 1 reception for 7 yards last week. So hopefully he gives me more than that. But you're right, it's hard to go with Clay, who may not even play, or may play it. May his knee may be worse than once he starts playing, and he might get you a donut. So I think you got to go with Henry if you have that horrible decision to make.
All right. Some others, by the way, with the Chargers defense, what would you go, Dan? Chargers defense or Cincinnati defense against that pathetic Denver quarterback situation? But, rookie, too, on the other end. So which way would you go?
I'm glad that I'm not having to make that decision, because I wouldn't have a whole lot of faith in either of those DSPs, but I agree with you. I think I'd go.
Even against those quarterbacks?
Well, I mean, the defense has to still be. There are a lot of DSPs. It doesn't matter who they play; they're just not putting up numbers because they're not scoring either through special teams or off of fumbles or interceptions. Sure. And so, if all you're getting is that the other team doesn't score a lot, then that's not going to be enough to give them a difference-making kind of score. But I do agree. I mean, if there is a matchup there that I like, it's definitely Cincinnati going against Denver, because if anyone's going to give you a few free interceptions, it's the 3-headed Denver quarterback.
Yeah, probably we'll see Paxton Lynch next week. But then again, they say he's supposed to be the number 2 quarterback this week, and somebody needs to explain to me 2 things. First, why Vance Joseph is still the head coach of the Broncos. Number 2, if Paxton Lynch can be the number 2, why isn't he the number 1? At least for this week. So last question, Jamal, Matthew Stafford, Matt Ryan. Which way would you go?
Well, we talked about this on previous episodes. I'm going to go with Stafford. And Matt Ryan has picked it up a little bit the last couple weeks. He has started playing decently to where it's a discussion again between these two. But I don't. Matt Ryan's playing against Seattle. I know Seattle's defense is hit hard by injuries, but they still have a solid defense. Matthew Stafford is playing Chicago. I like that matchup a little better. Plus, he's been playing well the past couple weeks. Definitely at a little higher level than Ryan, I think. So I got to go with Stafford again this week, as I have at least 2 weeks in a row.
Agree with that, Dan? Might as well, right? You've been agreeing
all the show.
Yeah,
I mean, I think I might actually go with Ryan. It's close though, but
no Thomas, no Chancellor. I mean, no Sherman, no Chancellor.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, eventually you can't keep losing, elite players and it not have an effect on your team. I mean, it's just sort of inevitable. I mean, going into the season, Kansas City was considered a really good defense, and then they lose Eric Berry, and now they're considered a crap defense, although they'll probably do well today against the Giants. But they're difference-making players. That means it makes a difference when they're not on the field, and you can't just take away Richard Sherman and Cam Chancellor, 2 of the best defense players in the whole NFL, and it not have an effect. And furthermore, those guys played last year when Atlanta played in Seattle, and Matt Ryan had a great game. Obviously, he was playing at a different level. He had a different offensive coordinator.
Yep.
But I definitely think he'll have a big day in Seattle. I think we might see a shootout up there. So
okay.
I think I would lean on Ryan this week, but it is close.
All right, sounds good. Want to thank Dan and Jamal once again for joining us here on the show. We'll see you again next Sunday morning and every Sunday morning through the end of the regular season with Jamal Murphy and Dan Weinrich right here on the Ouralds Football Radio Network. Don't forget you can check out our on-demand shows following every live broadcast on our YouTube or iTunes pages. If you have any questions or comments, you can also send us your messages by following us on Twitter at PrimeSN. We'll see you tomorrow for another Ouralds Football Network program as we recap the weekend in pro and college football on OFN's Weekend Review. For Jamal, for Dan, I'm Greg. We'll see you next time.